Yeah, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Great pleasure to be here, and great honor, actually, for me in my first capacity to, as freshly elected member of the Bitkom board, to open this conference, buying a bit of time for you, Minister Jarząbek, and speaking to you actually as a co-founder and CEO, as you said, of a reasonably still young company. I'll be honest, that made me a little bit dubious and wondering about what exactly my best capacity would be here opening and talking to you, because clearly there's a lot of expertise in the room on this topic, and obviously we'll hear from Thomas Jarząbek in a minute, probably a lot more around the policy element of technology and how we think about it. So I figured in this new world of AI, data, quantum, that we're sort of in, let's say, last decade, and it'll certainly be accelerating in the next decade in ways we can probably not quite imagine. We're all kind of builders, and we're all thinking about what can be done and how can we build things. And having built with my team in Helsing something for Europe in the last years, and maybe having a few experiences, I thought I'd start with a promise and maybe a view on building. So the promise is that many of you who've been listening to speeches on the state of play in Europe and AI probably have gotten quite used to Europeans often getting on stage to complain and using this opportunity to lay out things that Berlin or Brussels should fix, and talking about the dangers of tech or tech in geopolitics. If you're worried about that, you can rest assured I won't bore you with any of that. It's not, I think, how we should think about it. Frankly, I'd rather offer a view on how we can think about building, how we can actually win in those technologies, and hopefully change things for the better. Basically, to suffice it to say, in the race between that European proclivity to complain and American entrepreneurialism, I think we know who's built the stronger position of the last decade, and I think it's on us now to do the same. So I feel some sense of responsibility, knowing there's about 2,000 people registered to this great summit, that I think we come out with a sense of activation. There's a room full of Germany's and Europe's greatest AI quantum talent gathered here. So this speech opening this cannot be about despair. It can't also be just about asking politics for help, or it can't also be about things that are hard because of regulation and stuff. I think today and tomorrow, in my mind, has to be more about activation, about doing things, complaining less. I think the AI summit in Paris, for those of you who were there, actually was a great case in point, and I think it sent some of that spirit into Europe. So instead of long policy briefs, I just want to share three things with you in a few minutes. First, how, from a position of Helsing, AI company active in geopolitics, I see the changing world and why we really need to build new companies, be that as part of big companies that some of you may come from or entirely new. Second, I want to bust some myths about why that should be so difficult and why everything is holding us back in Europe. I just don't fully agree with that. And then thirdly, a few thoughts on how I believe our continent can win in AI. And yes, that includes some policy actions, but not too lengthy and hopefully not too repetitive. So firstly, a brief view on the changing world. So we can make this short, let's face it, the old world is not coming back. These are challenging times. Europe is clearly being tested in our economic model, our security architecture, our societal cohesion and political resolve. And yes, clearly the technologies we'll talk about in the next couple of days, rise of compute, breakthrough of AI, quantum, that's all at the heart of this transformation. But here's the question, I think, to us. If every region faces kind of the same technological shift, why should Europe struggle more in this? Why do we find it harder to adapt to this change than, say, the US, South Korea, China? Part of the answer, I believe, is nostalgia. We keep reminding ourselves that we are an industrial powerhouse, and yes, that's true, our industries are strong, but most of them were really founded 150 years ago. And the model that sustained them, cheap energy, global exports, American security guarantees, that model is not coming back. The economist Robert Gordon, if you haven't looked it up, I recommend reading his paper, put it quite clearly. Until the mid-1990s, Europe's productivity kind of kept pace with the US, with about a 10-year time lag. And that's significant because we should remind ourselves there were times in some industries where we were actually truly world leading and basically on par. I think we still are in many ways. However, in the last decade, the break came when the US built a tech sector and Europe did not at that scale. And that's basically the only difference in productivity and growth between the two regions. So the US built a tech sector, and this advantage led them to an even more advantageous position for all the technologies that follow. And that's the challenge, I think, to us as we're here. So if you were early in personal computers, you gained when the internet connected them. If you were ahead in the internet, browsers unlocked e-commerce, that helped get you ahead in software, cloud helped scale that, and if you were ahead in cloud, it gave you a good edge and foundation for AI. So there's a sequence of compounding, and of course the US built tech companies early, it has continued to lead. However, every race also, and I think AI and quantum are sort of the perfect case examples for that, every race also means that the cards get shuffled again. And I think particularly in this revolution right now, the cards get shuffled again, and I'll get to why that is a big opportunity. So Europe's problem is not just, yes, regulation, market fragmentation, that's all true. I think, and it's my personal view, our problem is that we lack the will to build more tech-oriented companies, be they new, be they transformed existing companies. And companies matter. They don't just adapt to regulation, they actually shape it. We didn't have perfect car regulation and then car makers. It was the other way around. So let's talk about that. How can we turn this around? How can we be world leading again in the things that we all in this room do well and believe in? One thing before we get there, I think, is we have to debunk some myths. And there are three common myths that I hear a lot about as a founder about European tech and building tech companies. Let me just tackle them one by one. First myth is Europe doesn't have the right people. We don't have the type of talent because we missed some of those previous revolutions. That is simply false. It is simply false. Europe has one of the largest talent pools in AI and software in the world, bared out by all the numbers. Many of the leading AI labs were founded here. In fact, some of the companies mentioned still have them here. We very proudly recruited from some of them. And at Helsing, actually, we've hired hundreds of the world's best engineers, all European, because of the nature of our business, defense, who had left Europe for big tech, and they wanted to come home. They wanted to build here. And frankly, they also didn't want to get on calls with a 9-hour time difference anymore. So talent is not the problem. The challenge is to build companies and missions that are strong enough to attract and retain the talent. And that does require competitive pay. It also requires stock options that actually work, tax regimes that make it possible. None of that is easy or perfect in Europe, but it is workable. It is workable. Myth 2, Europe cannot raise the capital. Again, yes, the US market is bigger, venture capital is a bigger industry, but there is really no shortage of money in Europe for what we're trying to achieve. We have plenty of money. What matters is not where the scale-up money at the later stage necessarily comes from. What matters is that you actually get it and that the governance and mission stays European. So if you do, as many companies do, raise your first rounds in Europe, that is by now totally possible, then it's, I think, also okay to raise funds from the US in later stages. We shouldn't solve a problem that doesn't need solving as long as our companies are European and we actually have the capital to create technologically superior products. That is what matters. Yes, even better if we have full European capital, but we can build companies as it is today. And there are plenty of hopeful stories right now to look at. We've been privileged, but take Mistral, they just raised 1.7 billion euros, supported by ASML. Aleph Alpha has, I think, great funding support. Nico Health, a health AI company, 1.8 billion valuation, largely European shareholding, so it's not a one-off. Also, European returns to capital have been very stable and actually, on average, better than the US. So capital is here, companies are viable, returns are there. The funding ecosystem does need to grow larger, needs more dry powder for later rounds, but basically money can be accessed. Europe has plenty, and plenty have Europe on their map. Myth number 3, Europe doesn't have an edge in AI, and therefore, the US models have run with it. This is another race that's lost. I think that's clearly false as well, and I hope everybody in this room agrees. That's probably why you're here. This narrative sometimes gets pushed, but that doesn't make it more right. Yes, there's a lot of money spent on this in big tech, but I think we already see a maturing European ecosystem with deep tech and domain expertise companies that bring out great strengths in areas like health, defense, energy, many others. In all those areas, Europe is not just copying Silicon Valley or any other geography, but I think it actually is leading, maybe not in always in the driving of the frontier models in AGI, but arguably the money will be made in smartly applying AI for robotics, for deep domain applications that go beyond a language interface and database. So let's not forget, many AI applications go to the core of digital sovereignty, and that's what I feel quite passionate about. In a world of geopolitical competition, again, a different world from the one that most of us grew up in or spent their professional lives in, and a world of data dependency, it is quite essential that Europe builds its own capabilities, sets its own standards, and safeguards its prosperity and freedom. That doesn't mean that we're isolationist or we don't need partnerships, particularly across the pond, but it does mean that we own our destiny. So we do have talent, we can raise capital, particularly if you're part of a larger company already, and we have a lot of strengths to build on. So the question is then how we use them and how we build. So how can we win? What must we do to accelerate? Much has been said around the AI Summit already, and I won't regurgitate this, and I think there'll probably be a better speaker to follow on that. And I know you've thought about this for years, Thomas Jatzombeck, so I think we'll defer to you. But there's some obvious things that I want to point out, again, in the spirit of building. First, yes, we need a regulatory framework that fosters innovation. That means regulatory sandboxes. It means speed. So I want to frame this more positively. Yes, we need to talk about deregulation, but largely it's around sandboxes, areas where startups don't have to wait years for approvals or where companies that want to experiment on a new application can work more quickly. So yes, we need to talk deregulation, but we also have to be building. Just deregulating alone won't build anything. Again, I come back to how we build a dominant car industry. Secondly, I think we need to double down on our strengths, and that means attracting world-class talent immediately, retaining from Europe, but also attracting it from around the world. Education is vital, but it's long-term. Right now, we must draw exceptional people to Europe and make it attractive for those who left to return. I think there's lots that can be done there, and I think Europe is a very attractive place for people to come to. Thirdly, we need to build world-class infrastructure and open data ecosystems. I think that is a particular European flavor of how we think about these topics. We need more compute, clearly. I think everybody gets that now. We need more secure and open data platforms and a faster rollout of 5G and 6G. So it's really around owning that infrastructure, and clearly, in the long run, AI costs converge to the cost of energy. Of course, that has something to do with being strong on energy and independent. But finally, and as somebody facing and serving government, I must add that government must also lead by example as a customer. If AI, robotics, and software are truly core technologies, as again, I think probably we all agree in here, then public procurement must also prioritize innovative European solutions, be they in healthcare, energy, mobility, security, defense. I think that sends a vital signal, and again, private capital will double down. Talent loves that mission, and we will see upward spirals that will pay back manyfold. So in closing, and as a slight call to action, I just want to end on this note of positivity. I think Europe can be a continent of technology makers, not just technology takers. We've got the talent, we've got the capital, we've got the expertise. I think this summit is testament to this. What we need now is the will, and I think that spirit. Less nostalgia, less complaining, more building, more ambition. I do think if we do that, then the next great wave of technology will not just be made for Europe, it will be built in Europe by Europeans for the world. And yes, that will require partnership across the Atlantic, of course, but we've got to stay strong partners, not just license buyers and compute buying customers. So I thank you for all your time. Grateful that you've all come here. Hopefully there'll be time here today and tomorrow for the people to connect that can make the difference, wherever you are in the ecosystem, large companies, new companies, government side. I think the difference between success or failure in tech sovereignty really starts with a few people that want to build. Thank you and enjoy your conference.